This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again the famous Dr. Buck Melton, one of our leading, lights of the intellect in this part of the world. Now, Buck, we've mentioned earlier about how well you're accepting your defeat.
I was robbed.
The last election.
I was robbed, and that's all I will have to say about that in the words of
It must be terrible to drive by and look at the vice president's Naval
Observatory, which is a beautiful. I'm a naval historian. It would be so. It would work so well.
It would have fitted out so well there, and your wife would have enjoyed it. And I mean, okay, let bygones be bygones, and there's always
2024.
There's always another election in the offing. Well, we're discussing things about elections and the franchise and what's going on. And I might ask your comments about what you think the solution would be to ensure fair elections in every way, balancing the idea of everyone getting the right to vote with the idea that we're going to have there won't be any corruption or fraud, and people can't vote 3 times, and dead people can't vote, and presumably felons can't vote, or illegal immigrants can't vote. In Georgia, in any event, how can we put such a system together?
Well, that's a big order. I think before we get to that, we probably need to. I was just getting in at the end of our last episode on the way the electoral votes are counted.
Let's go back to that then. Let's go back to that, and the idea. And I'll tee you up there.
Yes.
So the idea is that possibly one arcane strategy would be for President Trump to not have the election certifiable by the Electoral College, where they meet in December because there's so much confusion, and cast the election into the House of Representatives, where I think they vote by state. Thus, there are more Republican states than Democratic states, and that would be a path to the White House.
Yes.
But that's quite a long shot.
Yeah, very
long shot. But
although in a sense, I get ahead of myself. But yes, the election of 1876, when there were 3 states that were, in terms of their internal politics, were in complete turmoil in 1876. The Democratic candidate, Samuel J. Tilden, had, as far as we can tell, clearly won the popular vote. So it came down to the electoral vote of these 3 states. And what happened was that different offices in each of these 3 states, South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida, sent competing, dueling electoral votes that had theoretically all been certified. So from each of these 3 states, there was a Republican set of electoral votes and a Democratic set. And that would not be a matter, going back to your question at the conclusion of our last episode, that would not be a matter whereby the House of Representatives would then get to choose. The House gets to choose if no one commands a majority of the electoral vote. And here, in 1876, you didn't know who had the majority. In that case, there was, and this wasn't fraud, but it was clearly party politics. There was a special commission of congressmen put together who decided on a straight party line vote that every single one of the disputed electoral ballots from those 3 states, and one in Oregon as well that was disputed, Republican. And that in the face of the fact that the Democratic candidate had clearly won the popular vote nationwide. Yes. The result was a political compromise that we need not go into here. And then shortly after that, Congress passed something called the Electoral Count Act, designed to try to stop that from happening in the future, but it's a monumentally badly drawn law that's internally self-contradictory and If we ever have to fall back on that, it's going to be a bad lookout. So.
Well, that's a nice little vignette about the way these things have happened. And we had the Hanging Chad episode in the 2000 election. And now we have sort of a similar thing, not exactly, but it approaches that.
I don't think it does. It's once again, it would have to be so widespread and so systemic, and I just. It
would be very difficult. Well, I mean, it's fair enough. It'd be very difficult to reverse the way the votes have come down. However, the tensions that have been engendered are in some ways similar. I mean, people are. You don't have to go far to have people say, "Well, the election was stolen; or it's not fair," and putting all those fears to rest would be important. And I would say particularly important, as we sort of mentioned last time, that we have this incredible election coming up in Georgia for the U.S. senators, and if the Democrats prevail on those and take those two seats, then that would really just be an earthquake and involved with everything. It presumably would be possible, though I doubt it would happen. A lot of the really, I would say, radical ideas that are afoot in the Democratic Party might come to fruition. I mean, at least one could imagine that might happen. I doubt it, but it does emphasize the importance of the election. Now,
well, I think if I can jump in there for just a minute, I try to play it out, and let's say that I think as a practical matter, because some of the Republicans who have clearly won election, and I'm thinking immediately, for instance, of Susan Collins in Maine, are. I'm sure you've heard the phrase RINO, R-I-N-O, Republican,
right.
and they are so very shaky that I think that in order to be sure of being able to block the Democratic agenda, the Republicans need to win both of these Georgia seats.
Yes.
I don't think one, and even then it's going to be razor thin. But that being said, let's say they don't. Let's say they lose both seats.
Yes.
And with the help of our new Vice President, Kamala Harris, who I should be in that seat, but we won't talk about that.
Well, I mean, you could actually be appointed.
I suppose so.
You can't. They can't. No. You could maybe get her seat in California.
Yeah,
I mean, that'll open. You could maybe use that as a springboard.
Yes, but be that as it may, I think we would then see a civil war within the Democratic Party. I'm going to take Biden at his word that he wants to be a centrist, or at least what a Democrat thinks a centrist is, versus the
Stalinist.
The squad.
The Stalinist.
Yeah, the squad.
Sort of AOC, Stalinist, right? Yeah.
Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who are really going to be trying to, who are going to be really trying to push a very hard left agenda.
Yes.
And I think if they were to succeed in doing that, and I think they would probably get an assist from Kamala Harris on that. And let's say they overwhelm Biden, who is older, who may be
less
willing to put up a fight. That if they did that, I think they would get slapped down so hard in the 22 midterms that. Yeah, I'm not sure how much could be undone, but they would really be setting themselves up for a massive failure in 24.
With the presumption that the voting would be fair. I mean, with the presumption that would, and see, what seems to be happening is that if one party prevails, the other party claims fraud or voter suppression. So, well, you were elected because of voter suppression, or you were elected because of voter fraud. So having an agreed upon system would be an important event.
Well, the loser always likes to at least a degree, say that there was something wrong with the system.
Yes.
Hillary Clinton's people. Now, what was wrong with the system back then was the Electoral College, and they'll say, well, okay, I don't care if it was done correctly according to the rules or not. The rules themselves are wrong.
Yes.
The objection here is that there is something underhanded going on. And I can't subscribe to that. It'd have to be so widespread and so systemic, and that if it really is that bad, if the conspiracy runs that deep, we have no hope whatsoever of a fair election in the future, no matter what we do. We're sort of living in a matrix environment, and there's no point even talking about it.
Well, let's just look into the election that's coming our way. Now, one thing that amuses me is that apparently, maybe once again an apocryphal story, but thousands of people from California are moving to Georgia.
I've heard rumors of that myself.
Big caravans, or as we speak, big caravans are making their way across the prairies and across the Mississippi on their way, with big, huge, Democratic Party stickers, and there are thousands of them coming in. And and then they supposedly, once they're here, they have the right to vote if they register. Question would be, do you have to register to vote? If you say, well, I live here, or can ballots go outside the state as far as that goes?
I think
can you live in another state and you've moved to California and
there may be a residency requirement.
I think,
but I don't know how long it is. It may simply be 60 days that might get you in just under the wire. So, and you've certainly, once again, there is a basis for that in American history, and I think of what happened in Kansas in 1854, that when
Bloody Kansas?
Bleeding Kansas, it was when it was opened up to settlement, widespread settlement in 1854, with all federal restrictions on slavery removed, which had been in place up to that point. And you had a stampede of both pro-slave and anti-slave forces, and the most militant of both of those groups, who are now living cheek by jowl.
Yes.
And you can make a good argument. I mean, we all hear about Fort Sumter in 1861. You can make an excellent argument that the Civil War actually began in Kansas in the mid-1850s and did not end for 10 years.
I think John Brown had experience there.
He did indeed.
Yes.
So.
Well, now let's just look into the Georgia election now. These people from California are coming in. Could both parties just solicit their supporters to just arrive in Georgia? If the Democrats can do it, why can't the Republicans? Just people coming in, well, I'm going to drive across the Savannah River with my Trump stickers on, and I'll just cruise in and say I live here.
What's good for the goose?
Well, now, it seems to me there should be a special attention to the legalities behind the electoral process that's happening. And one of the things that's been said, now once again, it seems to be apocryphal, but it's out there. The Dominion voting machines made by a company called Dominion are in Georgia, and they're easy to manipulate and commit fraud with them. And it's said that they were, once again, maybe apocryphal, they were first established by Cesar Chavez, who was the dictator in Venezuela, and he used them to manipulate elections to put himself in power, and on all this idea there's knavery there. Well, I think for sure that just to establish everybody's confidence in the electoral process, there needs to be substantial attention on these machines. I mean, it's once again, it's been alleged that the real thing that would turn the election around, we've spoken about this, we have these de minimis things, well, there are 12 votes that weren't counted, or somebody made a mistake here and pushed the wrong button and there are 300 votes, but not enough to turn the election around. Well, people are saying, whoa, it's actually Trump was elected by 50 million votes or 30 million votes or some huge number, and the way that there was a conspiracy to manipulate these voting machines, and they just pushed the button, and it's easy to do, they say. And it's said in Texas, the Electoral Commission there turned the machines down because of how easy it was for fraud to happen. And I think the same machines are being used in Pennsylvania, well, and as part of that electoral dispute. A question I ask is, I can't imagine that happened or would conceivably happen, but certainly there needs to be a real effort to say this is totally fair, 100% fair. And all of the allegations that were made in the presidential election don't resurface in this very, very important senatorial contest. And I think particularly I've heard stories about the mailing out these ballots, mailing them out. I mean, I assume the same thing is going to take place, and can that be monitored quite carefully? I mean, I don't know. It would instill confidence if, in fact, it was being very carefully monitored and watched.
Well, I think it comes down to Americans' general faith in their fellow Americans, and that there is something sacrosanct about voting. Because if you don't have that, then the system can be gamed in any number of ways. I mean, you could have poll watchers, you could have people watching people fill out ballots, but at some point, somebody or something has got to count the ballots, and they could be hacked, they could be bribed. The counters themselves could be partisan. So the only safeguard against that is that we all tend to believe, or at least the vast majority of us tend to believe, you don't monkey around with this. If you don't have that, then there's no point. I think there's no point talking about safeguards because they can be any safeguard can be gotten around.
You know, I think we've come upon a very important issue here in our country, and that is the notion of trust. So, in a time of increasing diversity and increasing, I would say, tensions and differences coming to the fore, and people saying, well, this is my America, no, this is your America, and really something that's in some ways similar to Spain in 1935 before the Spanish Civil War. I won't get into that particularly, but the idea is trust is really the absolute essential arrangement for any country to survive. And I think there's statistics out there about how the trust numbers have diminished so substantially. And it's really a very troubling thing. If there's no way that you can, we've said, well, we want to be sure everything is correct and that nothing is amiss. And that no American will trust another American. Nobody will trust a politician. Nobody will trust the IRS. Nobody will trust vote counting. Nobody will trust the city council. And along with that, it's the idea that bribery is occurring. So the other shoe to drop with the illegal, I guess, some kind of problems with elections would be, well, the person was paid off and the person is pursuing power with the idea they're going to get a lot of money, or their constituents will get a lot of money, and and they'll put a corrupt process in. That's really, I think I see that out there as the tip of the iceberg to destabilizing the country.
And this takes us back to Kansas, because you had something. The question, and this is a major theme in the courses I teach, are the forces that bring us together strong enough to prevail over the forces that want to pull us apart. And that was the case in the United States, at least among the voting part of the populace, down to the 1850s, when the extremists of both sides started to say, I would rather kill these people and live in a separate country than try to live in the same country with them anymore. And that's what you see in Kansas, the rush to control Kansas, or the rush to control Georgia in 2020, and the willingness to use violence. And you see not my president from the Hillary people. The election has been stolen from the Trump people. It's a toxic, dangerous sort of situation.
And don't you think it's likely to continue? I mean,
I see no sign of it changing. I see it's just going to get worse.
And the inflammatory efforts on both sides to sort of ignite the country, they're really worrisome to me. I mean, they have the great marches on Washington for competing, I guess, political groups, and they're fighting. It's reminiscent in a way of the Weimar Republic in Berlin, 1928. Mm-hmm. The communists and the Nazis are fighting on the street.
And I think the irony is, you can understand it coming out of Weimar Germany, because the German economy, they had their noses rubbed in the disaster at Versailles.
Yes.
You've got the economy being completely trashed. The American economy is still fundamentally, if you don't count the national debt, is one of the strongest in the world, with one of the highest standards of living in the world. What are we fighting for? Now, obviously, there are groups, there are ethnic groups, there are regions that don't have that same level of prosperity. And the thing that immediately comes to mind is the very high-profile. I think I can say, well, I better not say it, but what appears to be certainly the alleged murders of black citizens by police officers acting illegally, and that points out certain inequalities that are simply not acceptable. So,
yeah, if in fact that's the case, and I mean, so obviously any malfeasance of a police officer is awful. In these events, when many policemen are killed in line of duty, it's a very difficult job. That's an understatement. I mean, getting into very difficult situations, and there is the I guess the extraordinary tension of the have and have-nots in the country, and the haves and have-nots are often, it can be demarcated by ethnicity, race, and also family circumstances. And it's a really very, very difficult chasm to cross. Mm-hmm. And it can be said as, how do you cross that chasm, and is the government going to do it? And presumably the Democrats are in power, and as far as I can tell, they're making one of their major policies is the income redistribution, and also sort of a reparations light. I mean, some kind of reparations that it's not really called reparations, but in fact is that. And it is tailed on to affirmative action, which you could also say is kind of a reparation story here. Mm-hmm. The situation is complicated by all of the extraordinary different ethnic groups in the country. And so we're approaching, I think, a very difficult situation. And it's made worse by, I guess, the mocking the country on many fronts. And if you look out there, the number of people that I would say basically hate the country, it's a big number. And the hatred becomes so extraordinary, and also an assault against the history of the country. This is just basically a wicked country. It always does wicked things. It's a Satan's country. It ought to be destroyed, and let's blow the whole place up. And there are many people that believe that. And I'm reminded of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. If you said, we have all these diverse, it wasn't a melting pot. You had diverse groups of people that disliked one another and had 1,000-year history of antagonisms, and they were all trying to get together and make it in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And I think one of the ways they tried to make it work was they tried quotas of different types. So you were treated as a Czech or a Romanian or an Italian, and you have 3 jobs for you. And it seems to be one of the things that's a danger in the country, and I really profoundly believe this, is if you start treating people as part of a particular ethnic group, and you don't treat them as an individual, then you're obviously just headed straight for hell. And it appears the country is having a hard time getting off that track. The French, I think, I mean, I've said this, I like the way the French do this. They just treat everybody like the same. They try to. We're the same. They don't distinguish between this or that. We have the French way of doing it. Everybody is the same in France. And you can't wear a burqa here because that's not what French people do. On the other hand, you have a vote. You have the same rights as anyone. And that's kind of the way the deal goes. Well, I'm concerned about the direction the country is taking with the idea that everyone is part of a group, and we're going to have quotas for groups, and we're not going to necessarily put the best person in position. We're going to just try and, I guess, make up for the failures of American history. We're going to try and do something, which means, I think, the country becomes less competitive, less able to exercise its special magic on the world stage. Well, that's my little dissertation.
Well, I think the problem with that, the first step was to be, how do you get rid of the hate?
Yes.
That people feel aggrieved rightly or wrongly, and on many occasions they feel aggrieved rightly, and how do you break that cycle? So, okay, we're all going to be Americans now and we're all going to be equal, but what if you do have that one racist police officer out there who gets caught on video abusing his authority in a racist way, which is going to provoke a response. And I can't remember the Shakespeare play, but your father killed my father, now you die. And I think that's what MLK Jr. was warning us about. You've got to break it at some point.
Well, of course, racism is a two-way street, and so you can certainly be a Mexican racist, a Afro-American racist, a Cherokee racist, a Greek racist, and what does that mean exactly? It means that you just don't treat people as a person, and you take them, you prejudge them based on their skin color. So it may well be that people might, in an Afro-American community, prejudge a policeman, a Caucasian policeman walks down the street. Maybe they'll throw garbage at him, obscenities, and that can be done unfairly. And of course, it's a two-way street. And the idea of everybody has to be respectful for each other, I think, is a very important issue. Let's see now. What's the song? All I want is respect. I mean, you know that one, R-E, whatever we spell that one.
Maybe Aretha Franklin.
Oh, you got that one. Yeah, that's good. No, I think that's great. I think that's exactly every human needs respect.
Well, and I think there's
of all colors.
Yeah, and I think there's a problem in that 350 million people, there are going to be some outliers, and so we have to train ourselves to accept that there is going to be some level of incivility. The problem is, how do we, especially in a place where, in a country where cameras are everywhere, coverage is everywhere, how do you stop the outlier from exploding and provoking a huge retaliation? And there are some areas where it's simply not allowed. I've never been convinced by the statement, well, yeah, there may be some racist policemen, but it's only like 0.5%. Yeah. And the great comeback to that is, okay, what if Delta Airlines came out and said, well, only 0.5 to 1% of our pilots fly into mountains. That's not that's an unacceptably high figure. So,
well, here's what some people are doing to basically solve the problem, and that's by censorship. Mm-hmm. So, in other words, anything that would be, well, I guess if you wished to inflame people, then presumably you could do it, and you have your media sources on each side. And then, as far as I know, there's been efforts in the electronic media, the internet, to basically try and stop, quote, hate speech or disinformation, which is a slippery slope to go down, isn't it?
Yeah, and that takes us in a direction with less than a minute to go that we probably can't flesh out in this episode, but we can do it in our next one if you like.
Well, Bucky, as we conclude here, I hope you're not too morose about these political things.
She stole my seat.
Yeah, that's right. That's even whatever it is. Did you imagine this would happen?
Not my vice president. That's going to be my motto.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Well, it's great having you here tonight, Bucky. So good luck to you, and
Indeed.
We'll talk some more.
Right.
It's good forward march
Yes,
here.
sir.
Let's make it work.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.